What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. So when it comes to comic books, of course, writers have runs. And their runs last for usually however long they want them to, or sometimes it's only for a predetermined amount of time. With writers that are relatively new, their runs are usually predetermined by Marvel editorial. For more seasoned writers, they kind of have free reign on what it is they do and don't want to do. For example, Bendis will say, I want to take over Iron Man, and he'll write Iron Man for however long he feels like it. He'll say, I want to take over the New Avengers, and he'll write the New Avengers for however long he feels like it. Whereas newer writers are just kind of given tasks, and it's really just the hierarchy of things, right? It's like that in any job. The new guys are assigned tasks, the veteran guys get to choose theirs. And with the Incredible Hulk, it's much the same way in the sense that we had Peter David's run, which offered a lot of backstory on Banner's life and talked about how the Hulk persona was not just random. Bruce Banner had experienced a lot of, torture and turmoil in his life. And so when he was exposed to the Gamma Bomb and the Incredible Hulk came into existence, the Incredible Hulk was a physical manifestation of all of his rage and anger about how unfair his life had been. With Greg Pak's run, Greg Pak came along and he was like, okay, well, let's remove Hulk from the Earth landscape during Civil War, and we'll just throw him, we'll have the Planet Hulk event. And then it culminated with the Incredible Hulk coming back to Earth and waging war against humanity and the Illuminati, which ended with Banner being defeated, or I guess fighting to a standstill with the Sentry, and then Bruce Banner himself being thrown into a prison/lab, like a quarter mile underground or something like that. And so because of the way that World War Hulk ended, and because of the fact that Greg Pak was in the midst of focusing largely on Amadeus Cho and his own personal projects, it really fell to the shoulders of Jeff Loeb to relaunch it. But Jeff Loeb had been, he was a seasoned writer for Marvel Comics. He'd been writing for some time, and it was really his return to Marvel when he started out with the Hulk. And so he basically just kind of relaunched it, refreshed the whole thing by introducing the Red Hulk. Now, the way this initially picks up is we start out with Doc Samson. Now, Doc Samson's been a longtime member of the Hulk family. He's not new. You talk to anybody who's been reading the Incredible Hulk for any real measure of time, and they know exactly who Doc Samson is. His role has changed over the years, but he was a guy who, much like She-Hulk, was exposed to gamma radiation, but he had his own manifestation in the sense that his power would increase the longer his hair got, which is really kind of weird. But during this point in time when Doc Samson first showed up, it was really just experimentation. It was just trying new, wacky, and zany and crazy things. But because of the fact that Doc Samson was an intricate part of the Hulk mythos, he never really went away. He was always just sort of there, because when it came to the Incredible Hulk in terms of dedicated readers, it was much like Deadpool. There are a lot of people that know who Deadpool is, but they don't really read Deadpool stories. There's a lot of people who know who the Incredible Hulk is, but they don't read Incredible Hulk stories. Now, there's a lot more Incredible Hulk readers than there are Deadpool readers, but the fact remains here that the Incredible Hulk always just had this spot in the limelight of Marvel Comics with people knowing who he was. And so because of the fact that Marvel was bolstering his roster with Doc Samson, fans just kind of latched onto it. They were like, yeah, we like this concept of this guy. And so Doc Samson has sort of changed over the years, but one of his big draws was being a psychologist, being able to delve into the human mind, sometimes even being able to manipulate people, and because of his ability to understand the mind, had some measure of resistance to like telepathy and things like that. But what we do is we initially pick up in Dmitry, Russia. Now, the reason why this matters is because Doc Samson's quite literally just retracing the trails of a massive conflict with the Hulk. Now, the reason why, Doc Samson's here, the reason why She-Hulk's here is because to the best of their knowledge, Bruce Banner is locked up in a cell underground. And so the question is, if some being showed up here and basically beat Abomination to death, then what happened? Like, who was this being? Who was this person that showed up? Because as far as Doc Samson's able to tell by going through and reliving, basically experiencing, all these, this entire battle, he's able to basically tap into the emotional state of this, Red Hulk as it was beating the hell out of Abomination. Now, this ultimately culminated in the Red Hulk not only, effectively punishing the Abomination, but also shooting him. Now, this is where things get a little bit different, because in their mind, Banner was just a force of nature. Banner was just sheer strength. He would just fight and pummel whoever it was that he was going against until he won. He was just brute force. Banner, unless we were talking about like Professor Banner, like Smart Banner, Savage Hulk in and of his nature, didn't carry guns. He didn't shoot people. He would just beat the hell out of them. Not only that, this Hulk seems to have wherewithal. It seems to have a higher level of intelligence. And so what we do when we pan out is we realize it's not just Doc Samson and She-Hulk, it's also General Thunderbolt Ross, it's also Tony Stark, and it's also Maria Maria Hill. Now, She-Hulk here is, of course, she's present here just because of the fact that she has so much experience with Banner because, her becoming She-Hulk is part and parcel to Banner being Hulk. Of course, in the sense that she received a blood transfusion from Bruce Banner, which is why she became She-Hulk in the first place. Doc Samson's here because of his knowledge with psychology. Tony Stark is here because, remember, this is pretty soon after Civil War. Of course, it's before Siege and Dark Reign. And so, at this moment in time, he's still the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. This, of course, we have Maria Hill here just because it's Maria Hill. She's kind of the second in command for S.H.I.E.L.D. at the moment. And then we have Thunderbolt Ross because he's a guy that spent his life tracking down Bruce Banner. And so he's really one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to someone who has, who's exposed to gamma radiation. Now, at this point, Jeff Loeb gives us a little bit of bickering back and forth in the sense that, he establishes who the characters are. And that was the basis behind this. Because it was a relaunch, it was a picking up point. In addition to this, because it introduced a new Hulk, this relaunch was more of a starting point than other stories had been. And what I mean by this is whenever comic books relaunch characters, whenever it's like a soft rebranding or something like that, a lot of times things will stay the same. They'll simply say like, hey, this is, we're picking back up again with the Incredible Hulk. And so people who liked the Incredible Hulk will read it. People who didn't care about him wouldn't read it. But when Jeff Loeb came out and said, hey, there's a new Hulk on the scene, well, then everybody went to go read it because everybody wanted to know who this new Hulk was. Now, for those of you guys who weren't around, who weren't reading comics, in 2008, I think it was January 2008 when this came out, when Red Hulk was announced, it was a big deal. Like, everybody wanted to know who the Red Hulk was. That was like the huge mystery. Who is the Red Hulk? And so ultimately, the group basically comes to the decision that this individual, this being, is essentially imbuing, just kind of letting off gamma radiation. Not only that, this being was able to completely overpower and take out Abomination with sheer force of will. Not only that, Abomination couldn't really offer much in terms of a counterattack. And so this tells us that whoever this person is extremely powerful in terms of their physical strength. Now, before they're able to get too much further, they're basically met with the Russian superhero team, the Winter Guard. Now, the Winter Guard is basically nonsense. They are dumb, but they have some cool history. For those of you guys who don't know, and we talked about this in my Colossus video, back when Colossus was a child, because of the Avengers, Russia was looking to create their own Avengers team. And so what they did is they literally just started rounding up people who had superpowers. The problem with this was that Colossus was basically rescued by Charles Xavier, and he ended up going on to join the X-Men. But the Winter Guard are effectively Russia's Avengers, is basically who they are. Red Guardian is a mantle like Captain America that's just passed down from one person to the next, so on and so forth. Crimson Dynamo, of course, has a pretty lengthy history, but the Winter Guard are about as irrelevant as it gets when it comes to superhero teams. They're right there alongside Alpha Flight. And so I know there's fans of Alpha Flight guys, but Alpha Flight's not really relevant. But the idea here is, the Winter Guard steps in and says, hey, look, Abomination was Emil Blonsky. Emil Blonsky was Russian. This fight took place on Russian soil. This is our crime scene. You need to leave. And essentially what happens, Doc Samson, Tony Stark, Maria Hill, they're like, hey, look, we're here investigating an act by what we believe to be someone who is the Incredible Hulk. Banner's managed to escape or is sneaking out or something along those lines, but we have every, just as much right to be here as anybody else. But ultimately they end up just kind of backing off. Tony Stark and them end up basically vacating. And the reason for this is because if they were to stay and they were to, engage in any real measure of a fight for the long term, because of course there's a scuffle between them, but if they were to turn it into something big, it would end up being an international incident. And right now, that's the last thing they need. And so as these guys are fighting one another, and as Tony Stark starts to level his head and starts to realize it's time for them to get out, they're suddenly met by a survivor of the village that's been totally obliterated in the fight between Abomination and Red Hulk. And this survivor simply just keeps saying red. And so what we do is we switch over to the Alaskan frontier and we basically pick up with Rick Jones. Now again, Rick Jones has been a long time part of the Hulk mythos. And in fact, Bruce Banner becoming the Hulk was because of Rick Jones, in the sense that Rick Jones was a kid who was just goofing around, just kind of dicking off. And when the gamma bomb was set to go off, Bruce Banner ran out and pushed Rick Jones out of the way because he was sitting in the path of where the bomb was supposed to detonate. And in his place, Bruce Banner was imbued with this gamma radiation, becoming the Incredible Hulk. And ever since then, Rick Jones has kind of been this character that is like the one guy that can usually talk the Incredible Hulk down. Now, of course, you have Betty Ross, and Betty Ross was very much an important part of, the Hulk mythos. But in terms of anybody who wasn't Betty Ross, Rick Jones was the only other guy who could ever really call himself the Incredible Hulk's friend. But picking up in Alaska, we basically follow Rick Jones as he's going to be introduced as a character called A-Bomb. Now, we haven't really been given a fleshed out story at this point on how Rick Jones became A-Bomb, as far as I'm aware. As far as I'm aware, this is the first appearance that we get. Now, I haven't read too much into his character. I'm pretty sure there is a future future story that fleshes that out, that may be something that we may or may not cover. But for the sake of this discussion, we end up traveling into the Death Valley, Nevada Air Force Base, where Bruce Banner's basically being held. Now, we're following, of course, Thunderbolt Ross and Doc Samson, because the question they have is, does Bruce Banner know what's going on? Does Bruce Banner have any inkling of what's happening here? Not only that, for the most part, it seems like it'd be impossible for Bruce Banner to escape from his confines. And so if there is someone running around that is a Hulk, then Bruce Banner is the one person to ask, because he's the one person in the world that has the most experience when it comes to gamma radiation. And so from here, we switch over to the new SHIELD helicarrier as it's been commissioned by Tony Stark after he became director of SHIELD. And at this point, it's really just kind of SHIELD doing some investigating. It's Maria Hill, saying, hey, we found the gun that was used to shoot Abomination to kill him. She also goes as far as to say that this weapon that was used seems to have been designed by SHIELD. And so whoever it was that's running around as a Hulk and that killed Abomination seems to be someone that is either familiar with SHIELD or works inside of SHIELD itself. But while She-Hulk and while Maria Hill and while Tony Stark are talking, suddenly the Red Hulk busts in. The Red Hulk smashes in and grabs She-Hulk. Now, at this point, it's really just panic. And the reason why is because while She-Hulk is able to hold her own, or at least it seems like she is, from what Tony Stark and Maria Hill are hearing, the Red Hulk was able to infiltrate a SHIELD helicarrier without them knowing. And so this presents a massive problem on a multitude of levels. First and foremost, how did he get in? Like, how did, if he was able to get in there, then obviously it's a regular person. Otherwise, somebody would have said, hey, there's a giant red monster running around the ship. So it was obviously, Red Hulk in a human form. Not only that, he was able to, to get past all of SHIELD's defenses, which means that it's someone with clearance to get into SHIELD, which means it's probably a SHIELD agent or a high-ranking official. But then while they're trying to figure this out, suddenly they're basically met with She-Hulk being thrown down below, meaning that she was easily toppled by Red Hulk. And so at this point, Tony Stark says, okay, fine. Maria Hill says, hey, the SHIELD helicarrier is listing, meaning that it's tilting to one side. The Red Hulk seems to be tearing things apart. The helicarrier is going to come crashing down. And so Stark's like, okay, fine. We got to try to keep this helicarrier afloat so that we don't crash into New York City and kill people. But we've also got to try to find a way to subdue the Red Hulk, because remember, right now, they don't really know what they're dealing with. All they know is there's a giant monster, a giant Red Hulk, or at least they don't really know that he's, red at this point, but we know as the reader. So, it's a giant Red Hulk that's running around the ship, tearing things up, and defeated Abomination. And so the idea here is, okay, we've basically got to figure out what's going on. We got to get control of the situation. And so ultimately, it seems like we have Thunderbolt Ross and we have Clay Quartermain effectively hiding out. And suddenly Tony Stark, during an investigation, is attacked by the Red Hulk. Now, again, Stark does what he can against Hulk, but he's powerless. I mean, with his blasts, with his all his vaunted strength, it doesn't really make much of a difference. And so this is really a scenario where Stark simply says, okay, fine, we have the Iron Man protocol, activate that. But in reality, it's really just, Stark refusing to acknowledge the fact that they're gonna have to abandon ship. That's really what's gonna have to happen here. Now, of course, She-Hulk comes too, and she saves Tony Stark, before he falls off the side of the ship, simply because of the fact that his energy reserves are being exhausted. But doing the best they can simply doesn't seem to be enough, because in the end, the SHIELD helicarrier comes crashing down and is totally obliterated. And so at this point, we switch back to Rick Jones, and we have Rick Jones, traveling to this Death Valley, Nevada base where Bruce Banner is being held captive, simply because of the fact that he's going to find Bruce Banner. But when he gets there, some disembodied voice speaks to him and says, hey, I thought you were dead. And then of course it's revealed that it's the Red Hulk, and the Red Hulk seems to subdue Rick Jones. But then suddenly at this point, Rick Jones transitions into A-Bomb. Now, A-Bomb is basically like the second iteration of Abomination. It's like another version of Abomination. But again, as far as I'm aware, this is the first time he's shown up, and so we really have no information on how he got to be this way. But in the fallout of this SHIELD helicarrier crashing to the ground, of course, we have Tony Stark, She-Hulk, Maria Hill trying to survey the situation, trying to see if they can get things under control. But then Maria Hill says, hey, Stark, here's a transmission. We need you to listen to this. So this transmission is extremely important. And the reason why is because once Tony Stark fires it up, we learn there's something going on here with General Thunderbolt Ross and Bruce Banner. And the reason why we know that is because initially, like we saw before, it was Doc Samson and Thunderbolt Ross showing up and saying, hey, what do you know about what's going on right now? We've got a guy who traveled to Russia, presumably as a Hulk, killed the Abomination. No one knows where this new Hulk is coming from. No one knows why this new Hulk is emitting radiation more so than the Incredible Hulk ever was. And no one knows why he's using a gun. And so because of the fact that Banner is the foremost authority on gamma radiation, he says, fine, give me the files, I'll look at them, I'll see what I can do. But Thunderbolt Ross doesn't have a whole lot of faith in him. Now keep in mind, Ross hates Banner. I mean, having him here right now is, in the eyes of Thunderbolt Ross, the second best thing to simply just killing him. But but as he gets ready to leave, Thunderbolt Ross is pulled aside by Banner, and Banner says a couple things here and there, says some small phrases, but we can't really hear what they are. Now we'll find out why here in a little while, but as Thunderbolt Ross is taking his leave, and of course Doc Samson asks, hey, like what was that conversation about? He basically just says, hey, don't worry about it, it's nothing to be concerned about. But for Tony Stark, this is massive, and he's pissed that he doesn't know about it before, because a secret conversation between the Incredible Hulk and Thunderbolt Ross is something he needs to know about, especially when there's just a random Hulk running around and no one knows where he came from. And so jumping back to Death Valley, Nevada, with this conflict between A-Bomb and Red Hulk, this was really just Jeff Loeb setting the stage for a battle between Bruce Banner Hulk and Red Hulk. And the reason why is because with Banner inside this lab, it seems as though escape was impossible just because of the security systems that were built in, the fact that it was powered, the fact that he would be gassed if he tried to make his way out. It was almost impossible to get in. Not only that, he also drops clues in terms of who it is that Red Hulk is. Now, of course, we know who Red Hulk is right now, but within the confines of this story, we didn't know. And so while they're fighting on the military base, there's a couple instances, there's a couple things, for example, there's a retina scan that confirms this guy has access to it. The last time we saw that, it was both Doc Samson and General Thunderbolt Ross who were able to make their way inside. Now, of course, with Red Hulk and A-Bomb going against one another, because of the fact that their battle is so massive, because they're so strong, while Red Hulk is easily able to subdue A-Bomb, as he's punching him and beating the absolute hell out of him, he's literally punching him through, the planet, and down into, down below the surface. And because of this, it's creating earthquakes, in the immediate area. And because these earthquakes are so severe, it basically begins to damage, to shake, and to eventually rupture these gas tanks that are supposed to be gassing Bruce Banner, whenever he tries to make his escape. And so because of this, because it's such a volatile situation, he literally just transforms into the Hulk and smashes his way out. And so from here, we basically pick up with the security systems in the sense that there's these, robotic versions of Betty Ross as birds and so on and so forth. The only reason why that was done, at least as is told to us by Jeff Loeb, is so that if Hulk were to ever escape, they'd be able to play psychological games by having him go against what it looks like Betty Ross, which at the very least would, shake Hulk enough, or at least, cause enough of a pause that he could be subdued by whatever means they would normally use. But ultimately, because these security systems are easily taken out and they're eliminated, by the time Red Hulk is finished dealing with them, Bruce Banner has emerged. And so now we have Red Hulk versus the Incredible Hulk. And I'll be honest with you guys, when this first happened, when the story was first released, everybody who was reading it knew it was going to happen, right? Like we knew that if a new Hulk was going to be released, somewhere along the line, the Red Hulk would fight against him. It just made sense. Not only that, who would not be interested in a fight between the Incredible Hulk and the Red Hulk? One Incredible Hulk fan would not want to see that. And so because of this, it was really just the one thing we were looking forward to the most. Now from here, Jeff Loeb actually throws a little bit of humor into the story, because I think that's one of the important things. When it comes to the Incredible Hulk, they're usually hardcore, they're usually really tough, some really bad things usually happen. They're usually pretty dark and gritty. But for Jeff Loeb, he has a pretty good way of intermingling comedy and with a serious story. And the way he does this is we have a Uatu the Watcher, because again, this is before Original Sin. So this is before the Watcher was killed by Nick Fury. We have the Watcher descend down on Earth and basically say, hey, look, I appear whenever there are going to be monumental changes. And so if a storyline takes place and I show up, it means that storyline is going to be huge. But while he's in the middle of, breaking the fourth wall and giving us the spiel, he's attacked by the Red Hulk. And the Red Hulk punches the hell out of him and essentially just starts beating into him. But of course, Hulk steps in, and this is basically Jeff Loeb kind of transitioning back to the serious nature of the story, at least at this point in time. Now, one of the things that I really hope you guys notice here is the big difference between Red Hulk and Hulk himself. And I think Jeff Loeb did one hell of a job doing this. When it comes to Bruce Banner, like we talked about before, when it comes to the Incredible Hulk, he's just a mindless beast. I mean, no, that's Savage Hulk. Of course, Professor Hulk is smart, but when it comes to like Savage Hulk, Savage Hulk was just mindless. I mean, he would just get angrier and angrier. He'd get stronger and stronger. And the only solution to a problem was just beating it up. That's just how Savage Hulk was. That's what this is right now. This is Savage Hulk. And Savage Hulk just tearing through, and trying to overcome Red Hulk is thwarted by the fact that Red Hulk is smart. Red Hulk is tactical. He's strategic. He's able to think in his Hulk form. And so it seems very much like Red Hulk is a guy that can counter all the Hulk's moves. And that's how this works. Now, something else to keep in mind here is that we'll see at the end of the story, Red Hulk's just not as strong as the Incredible Hulk. His strength isn't limitless like the Incredible Hulk. And that's really going to be the edge, that gives Incredible Hulk the victory alongside Thor and the rest of the heroes. But the idea here is that as Hulk continues to pummel away, because he's basically just kind of like this broadsword, just swiping, just taking these huge strokes at Red Hulk. Red Hulk is more like a scalpel, and he's able to take these small maneuvers, sidestep, able to work his way around the Incredible Hulk, and in doing so, is effectively able to subdue him by breaking his bones, or at least breaking his arms. And so in response to this, or while this happens, this fight takes place, we switch over to Tony Stark. Now, Tony Stark is meeting with Gabriel Jones, and all Gabriel Jones is really saying here is, hey, we found some materials that were left behind. We found a few things here and there with regards to what was going on with the Red Hulk going through the helicarrier and tearing things up. But he also says that Clay Quartermain has passed away. Now, the death of Clay Quartermain isn't the biggest thing in the world, but it is pretty significant in the realm of S.H.I.E.L.D. And the reason why is because Clay Quartermain is a guy that dates back to the stories of Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., when he was the executive director and he was the guy running the show. And so Clay Quartermain has been part of S.H.I.E.L.D. almost as long as Gabriel Jones. Now, we know Gabriel Jones predates S.H.I.E.L.D. because he fought alongside Nick Fury as part of the Howling Commandos. But because of the fact that Clay Quartermain had served as part of S.H.I.E.L.D. with distinction is really a sad moment here, just because of the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. has lost one of its best agents. It's not a great big huge thing, but it is kind of cool to see Jeff Loeb, focusing on the smaller aspects of the story and kind of paying tribute to those individuals who have been part of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Marvel Comics that had passed away or that had died, in battle and had been part of the group for such a long amount of time. But not only that, we also have Commander Maria Hill presenting Tony Stark with a gamma irradiated coat. Now, Tony Stark doesn't initially know why this matters, and of course Maria Hill doesn't pick it up just because of the fact that if she were to be exposed to this radiation by it actually touching her skin, Lord only knows what would happen. She'd probably go through mutations. I don't know if she'd become a Hulk, but she'd probably die of cancer. But the fact remains here that Tony Stark doesn't really recognize the significance of this. In his mind, it's a gamma irradiated coat that was shredded when whoever this Hulk was turned into the Hulk, but aside from that, it doesn't really seem to tie into the major events going on right now. But Maria Hill says this coat belongs to Leonard Samson. And so it seems like what, Jeff Loeb is telling us is that the Red Hulk is Doc Samson. That seems to be the initial case. And the reason why he's saying that is because the Red Hulk puts off gamma radiation, the coat's covered in gamma radiation, putting two and two together, all paths or all the clues lead to Doc Samson. And so switching back to Red Hulk and the Incredible Hulk, because of the fact that Hulk had been beaten into unconsciousness, because he basically collapsed from the pain of having his bones broken, he eventually came to when Red Hulk woke him up, basically, shook him to the point that he woke up. And when he did, he found himself on top of, the Golden Gate Bridge. But as he's there, this is essentially Red Hulk saying, I wanted the world to see this. I wanted the world to be aware of the fact that I'm the one that killed, Bruce Banner. And so again, while the Incredible Hulk tries to fight back as best he can, Red Hulk's easily able to overpower him using, strategy, using intelligence. And while, I guess after Hulk is beaten, suddenly Thor makes his appearance. Now, this was a really cool thing. This is actually a very heated topic in the realm of Marvel Comics, because this is the segment in the story when Red Hulk lifts the hammer of Thor. Now, the reason why this is a big deal is because for years and years and years and years, for decades, the rule was only those who were deemed worthy could lift the hammer of Thor. How that worthiness was calculated was based just on the enchantment Thor had put on there. It wasn't until recently in Jason Aaron's run that we basically learned the hammer can think for itself, that the hammer decides who's worthy and who's not. The idea behind this, though, was that someone like Red Hulk wouldn't be able to pick it up. But even then, there was no guarantee, because while most people who had lifted it were people who were inherently good, guys like Andy Android could pick it up, but Andy Android was a robot, and so he was neither good nor bad. He was just a guy who could lift it. There were people that would fight against Thor but could still lift his hammer. It was just simply a matter of falling in line with, what Odin considered to be a person who was worthy of being an Asgardian or worthy of being Thor that would allow them to lift the hammer. But what Jeff Loeb did is he effectively circumvented that. Of course, while Thor is fighting against Red Hulk initially, his hammer has no effect. His hammer doesn't really do anything to impact him. And in fact, this takes Thor by surprise, because even if it didn't necessarily incapacitate Red Hulk in his entirety, at the very least, it would have caused him to stutter back. At the very least, it would have caused some kind of an effect, but it didn't. It literally just hit him as though it was hitting, true adamantium, and absolutely nothing happened. And so when Red Hulk's able to overpower Thor in terms of punching him, what he does is he grabs him and he basically jumps into space. Now, again, this takes Thor by surprise, because the question that's always been asked, or the question that was people are always kind of curious about up to this point, is if a person is not worthy of wielding Thor's hammer, can they lift Thor while he's lifting the hammer? Or does the enchantment still remain and Thor simply just can't be picked up? That was one of the questions people had, and Jeff Loeb kind of danced around this and said, well, it doesn't matter whether you're worthy or not. If you can't lift the hammer by itself, but you can lift Thor. But again, it creates just as many questions as it answers when it comes to the hammer of Thor. More so than that, Jeff Loeb used some pretty shaky logic here. What happens is once they get into space, Red Hulk says, look, I've been studying you and I've been studying your hammer. I know how it works. Only the worthy can lift it, you know, unless you're in zero gravity. And so what Jeff Loeb seemed to do was tie the worthiness of being able to lift Thor's hammer with the effects of gravity. Now, in truth, while this was really derisive in the community, while a lot of people didn't like it, it actually made sense. And the reason why is that the closer you are to Earth, the more intense the gravitational pull, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why satellites that are orbiting Earth don't just come crashing down immediately. The gravitational pull of Earth gets weaker the further away you are. By having him outside, or at least at the furthest reaches of the Earth's gravitational pull, it makes sense to say that the only way for the hammer to control who's worthy and who's not is to basically increase the gravity of whatever object it's on so that the person can't lift it. The gravitational pull just becomes so extreme. But at that point, we're talking about, you know, the idea that the hammer is able to influence reality, that it's able to manipulate, you know, the atoms and molecules of an entire planet or moon or asteroid or whatever it's sitting on at the time when someone tries to lift it. A more logical line of thought is that the hammer just increases its own mass to the point that it's impossible to wield, and its mass increases relative to the strength of the person who's trying to pick it up. And so, you know, the mass would increase infinitely in an example of someone like the Incredible Hulk, whose strength is also infinite. But again, Jeff Loeb doesn't really answer this per se. He just kind of dances around it, you know, and he says, well, if you're out in space, the effects of gravity don't really apply here, and so you can lift it, you can pick it up because the hammer needs gravity in order to prevent people from being able to pick it up. It's just one of those weird situations here. And so these few panels, you know, this fight between Red Hulk and Thor just split the community right down the middle. People were pissed, you know, because it was such a deviation from what they were used to. But switching back over to Tony Stark, because of the fact that he's trying to get this video deciphered, the best person to go to for this is really Reed Richards, just because of how advanced technology is in the Baxter Building and because of how intelligent Reed Richards is. Now, it's kind of ironic that Tony Stark couldn't figure it out on his own, considering he's probably the foremost person when it comes to engineering. But when it comes to overall intelligence, Reed Richards, Dr. Doom, these guys usually take the cake. And it would make more sense that Tony Stark would go to Reed Richards as opposed to Dr. Doom. I think it would have been cool if he'd have gone to Dr. Doom. I would have liked to have seen it. But the idea here is he basically goes to Reed and says, hey, can you try to see if he can't filter out what it is that was quieted down, the audio that was lowered in the conversation between Thunderbolt Ross and Bruce Banner. But from the nature of their conversations, the idea seems to be that as far as Bruce Banner is concerned, Doc Samson is most likely the Red Hulk. Now, we're just kind of drawing conclusions with this because we don't know. I mean, it's scratched out text that, you know, even Reed Richards and Tony Stark don't know the full extent of what it is that's being said, but the indication is that it's Doc Samson. And so switching back to the Golden Gate Bridge, we of course have A-Bomb rescuing the Incredible Hulk and then bringing him back. But what Jeff Loeb's doing is he's basically setting the stage for an expansion of the Hulk roster. He's basically growing things in terms of where they used to be. Because to be honest, and for those of you guys who are relatively new to the Incredible Hulk, up until this point, all you had were the different versions of Bruce Banner when he was the Incredible Hulk, Joe Fixit and the Savage Hulk and Professor Hulk and so on. And then you had like She-Hulk, and that was it. You didn't really have anything besides that. And so by adding in A-Bomb, by adding in Red Hulk, he's basically bolstering things. But what he's also doing is he's giving us the superior nature of the Incredible Hulk. Now, initially, when, you know, of course, Maria Hill goes to Tony Stark and says, hey, look, there was this great big huge event outside of San Francisco. There was basically this giant earthquake, and the result is that the Red Hulk seems to be causing San Francisco to slip into the ocean. Ultimately, he basically gathers like the powerhouses of Earth's superheroes. So you have She-Hulk, you have Ares, the god of war, you have the Human Torch, Namor the Submariner, the Thing, just characters who are kind of bred for war and would seem to be the best suited in this particular situation. And so ultimately we get this sort of finality. We get this final fight between, you know, the Incredible Hulk and Red Hulk, in the sense that we have, you know, all of them banding together, but Namor the Submariner is essentially calling on his forces from the sea to keep San Francisco from falling into the ocean. But we also have Banner finally showing up in the in Monument Valley in the Arizona-Utah border, having them go head to head. Now, this is cool because what Jeff Loeb says is that the Incredible Hulk is not just some mindless beast, right? He's not just some guy that just does stuff, you know. I mean, that was the perception, that's the way it always was, and in truth, that's the core of who he is. But what he does is he takes this idea and he says, the Incredible Hulk is learning. Now, historically, it's always switched. Like, it's always been flip-flopped. It was really just based on what the writer wanted to do. Peter David wanted, I guess, a far more intelligent Incredible Hulk. Greg Pak wanted a Savage Hulk until he was sent to Planet Hulk, and then he became more intelligent, and then he wanted him to maintain that intelligence when we went into the World War Hulk event. Jeff Loeb continues this trend and says Hulk's, yeah, he's got a savage side, his angry side, and when his anger takes over, God only knows what's gonna happen, but when it comes down to him being, intelligent, he has it where it counts. And so while he's not the most intelligent being ever, and his skills aren't necessarily on the same level as Red Hulk, he's able to figure things out. And what he says is where, the Incredible Hulk gets stronger the angrier he gets, Red Hulk gets hotter the angrier he gets. And so because of this, the Red Hulk's strength isn't limitless. Now, initially, Thor had returned, and Thor wanted to fight alongside the Incredible Hulk and deal with Red Hulk. But what happens is A-Bomb steps in and says, no, this is Hulk's fight. Hulk has to prove that he's the one that's stronger than Red Hulk. Not only that, Hulk's strength is limitless. So Red Hulk will eventually tire out. Red Hulk will simply just not be able to go after a while, but the Incredible Hulk will keep going strong. I mean, he's the Energizer Bunny. He keeps going and going. And that's exactly what's gonna happen. And that's exactly what does happen. With Red Hulk realizing that he's getting hotter the angrier he gets, and he's not getting stronger, he also comes to the realization that he can't outlast Hulk. But this realization comes too late when the Incredible Hulk's able to topple him and essentially able to pummel him into submission. And so from here is Jeff Loeb saying, okay, fine, we have the Red Hulk beaten. The Red Hulk is unconscious for the moment, and it's really kind of a parting of ways in the sense that that Thor says, okay, I guess we're friends now. We're besties, and he goes along his way, and it's A-Bomb trying to figure things out. Now, the cool thing about this is where he really leaves the stage open for the next story arc. Is the Incredible Hulk usually after a battle just wanders off, like he usually just goes off and does his own thing because he always wants to be left alone. But then he reverts back, to his Bruce Banner form as he's continuing to make his way, out to wherever it is that it leads him. Now, A-Bomb initially stops. Rick Jones says, hey, Banner, wait, here is the identity of the Red Hulk. But then suddenly out of nowhere, Doc Samson shows up and incapacitates Rick Jones, which means we're not gonna learn his identity. More so than that, we have General Thunderbolt Ross, who shows up at the side of Red Hulk and says, we gave you everything you needed to beat Bruce Banner. We gave you everything that you needed to pull it off. Now, initially, when I first read this, I was kind of like, well, I mean, I guess that's that. Like, I mean, this is basically, him saying, we gave you what you needed, but you couldn't pull it off. And it seemed as though Jeff Loeb was saying that they're two distinctly different people, but they're not. This is essentially the realization that General Thunderbolt Ross is the Red Hulk. That's who he is. That's the identity. So with that being said, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, be sure to hit the subscribe button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, drop a like and leave a comment down below because I'm kind of curious. I'm curious to see how this video will be received. I don't know if people will like it. I don't know if they'll care enough to watch it, but if it's popular, we could probably keep going with the Jeff Loeb thing because he does like a huge expansion of the Hulk mythos. But leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.